guys, thanks a lot for coming. So my name's Fernando, and I'm going to be talking about some work that we've been doing with Unity using our old pipelines that we use for film and TV. Um, so, um, Before I get started, I want to talk a little bit about who we are, so you get the context of what we're doing. Uh, my studio's name is Sparx. We are a member of a company called Virtuous. We're one of the largest content providers for digital content. We have about 400 artists worldwide. At Sparx, and we cover engagements that range from animation, VFX, 3D art for film, and game cinematics. Basically, we joined the Virtuous family in 2011. Virtuous is a big digital content vendor that started in China but is now headquartered here in Singapore. So some examples of some of the work that we do. We do a lot of work for high-end AAA games. It's probably our biggest division. We also work on film assets for a lot of films that you guys might have seen. The Marvel movies are usually one of our biggest clients, as is Star Wars and other things like Ready Player One was a recent one that we did a good amount of content for. What is more relevant to what we're looking at today is we do Sparx started as an animation studio. We've done plenty of animation for games as well as some TV shows. Star Wars Rebels was a big project that we did for a few years, and that was done entirely in the Ho Chi Minh studio in Vietnam where I work. So after that bit of self-promotion, want to talk about the project that we did. So Sparky was a project that we did starting about the middle of the year. So Sparky, whom you see there, is the mascot of our studio. It was built in a traditional film pipeline, the same pipeline that we would use to build an X-wing for Star Wars, or a spaceship for Thor. Or they had done a short film. It's a short animation, rendering it in Maya. It was rendered in Arnold, and we wanted to recreate it in Unity to kind of see what we can do with Unity, what we can achieve, and how we would go about achieving it. And do we have the right skills? Do we have the right people? Is it a lot of work? Is it a better tool for us? So we had a small team. We had technical artists. We had one lighter dedicated and one scene artist. Not included there is some VFX that was done mainly by the technical artists. So here I've got some shots of the original version, which was done, like I said, in Arnold. You might have seen the Unity version in the keynote this morning. So we had a pretty short production schedule. We did this in about 3 months. It was staggered because the offline, the Maya Arnold version was still getting finished, so we had to wait for some of their assets, and also we were trying to match their final look. Challenges. So one of the tricky things was we had to really push the visual quality. We wanted to be able to compare this with something that we rendered in Arnold or Mental Ray. The assets were done without having Unity in mind. So it's a very big scene. It's got millions of polygons. When we work in this context, we don't really watch performance very much since we're rendering offline. We had a texturing system called UDIM. I'll get into that in a minute, but it is not native to the standard materials that come with Unity. We had a rig that was not built for a real-time engine, so it had multiple hierarchies, and we don't have normal maps. We just add all the detail and geometry. We have some bump map to put things like scratches or any kind of texture that we wouldn't model, but other than that, we would build everything in geometry in our traditional pipeline. We also had to have a lot of artists working on the same scene, which is something that we had not tried in Unity. We had a scene artist, we had animators, a lighter, everyone kind of working on top of each other. And the final challenge is we had some scenes, some shots that needed some soft body animation. We had a leather jacket that we needed to animate. We had a bowl of soup that you'll see in a moment. And it was going to be tricky to see how this could be done with Unity. So a little bit more detail there about, like I said, the assets being authored for Maya and not for Unity. We had a very, very high resolution character. I think it's 250,000 triangles. The environment was very, very heavy, so we made the decision pretty early on that we were not going to try and get this to run at 30 frames a second. We were going to render it out using the recorder package, since performance was not one of the main goals for this test. Better. Okay. All right. I can hear that better now. So, little word about UDEM. The asset look dev was done in a software package called Mari. It's a software package very common mainly in the film, high-end film VFX world. It uses a coordinate system that goes beyond your UV system that goes from 0 to 1, and basically it has an infinite number of tiles, which we call slices per channel. So each channel, the diffuse, the bump, the specular, has a number of tiles. In the case of the robot, has 142 4K tiles for each channel, which is a lot. The reason for this is when we build, say, for example, an X-Wing for Star Wars, we build it way ahead of time, so we don't know if the director is going to have a close-up shot of it or if it's going to be way in the distance. So we really push the resolution as high as we can, and then the director can just do whatever he wants with it. So initially, we had some support from Unity. A field engineer wrote a custom shader that was able to load these textures, these texture arrays into the shader, which is not native to the standard renderer. Next tricky thing was the rig. We normally would rig using a lot more freedom. Unity, unlike other engines, will let you import a rig that has multiple hierarchies, but then you start getting unpredictable behavior. I would say I would prefer that Unity didn't import those things, because it caused a lot of trouble. We ended up just rebuilding the rig using a single hierarchy. It's something that I would have liked to do from the beginning if I knew about it. The animation had already been done, but the animation was done on a control rig that was driving the skeleton, so we were able to transfer it without losing any work. You can see an example there. It's a fairly complex skeleton, and we had to pretty much rebuild it for Unity. The next tricky part was the bump maps. Like I said, we had a lot of detail modeled, but we did not have normal maps. Thankfully, Unity allows you to load a height map and use it as a normal map. Basically, it creates your normals based on the height map. It's pretty good results. I would like to take a look at maybe baking these out in something like XNormal in the future, but I thought the results were pretty acceptable. The part about multiple artists collaborating on a single scene is really tricky, because one of the problems that we had is we had a VFX artist that was timing effects to the animation, which means not just that both artists had to work on the same scene, but they had to work on the same timeline, and that is somewhere where Unity doesn't currently have any support for that. It's the timeline asset is checked out by one person, and that's the only person that can use it. So it feels like there needs to be a little bit better support, even though some of the setups that ship now with the sample film project has a pretty good collaborative setup. But that was definitely a challenge that we haven't completely resolved. And then the soft body animation, we did the liquid. You see it on the right there. Was done in Houdini. The jacket was done in Maya cloth, and we used the Alembic cache feature, which was back then I think still a GitHub package, to export the Alembic cache and bring it into Unity. Visual quality, we were trying to get as much visual quality as we could, which meant that when we were able to switch to HDRP, which was released as a preview package about halfway through production, we decided to go with that. There was a good amount of rework, setting up the shaders and tuning the textures, and I would say the lighting had to be done kind of from scratch again. But the results were, I think, absolutely worth it. We also switched to ShaderGraph and found out, to our happiness, that the texture arrays are actually supported natively in ShaderGraph, so that's one less headache gone. We can use these UDIM mapping spaces natively in the new ShaderGraph. So let's take a look at it.
Hello, sir. Same as usual. Here you go. More, sir. See you tomorrow.
Don't need to look at the whole credit sequence, which is actually quite long. Okay, so what did we learn out of this, and where do we find? So we learned that yes, we do want to work with a real-time engine, specifically with Unity, and the big wins that we identified. Well, the first one was render times. Obviously, we did not have a render farm or the normal turnover that we would have with a pre-rendered project, but once you start working in the game engine rather than in a linear pipeline, your entire workflow starts changing quite dramatically. We had a very collaborative way of working. Everyone was working together in the scene very early, and some things like the VFX and specifically the lighting started coming in a lot earlier than they would in a traditional pipeline, which was a great way to really bring up quality very quickly. There was definitely a lot more engagement from artists, seeing their work come to life very quickly. We were able to, every few days, do a new version of this and show it to the full team. We also found that because we are setting up, in a traditional pipeline, we would break this into shots. They would be hard blocked, and we could not really make much in the way of changes without a lot of expense. We were able to change shots later and adapt things. I'll show that in a moment. We're able to iterate a lot, which I think there's a certain level of polish that we achieved that we could not do in the offline version. And also, we added some runtime scripts. If you see the traffic, the other cars going by, That was very easy to integrate. I mean, we do stuff like that in Maya. We do simulation using scripts, but the Unity is a much more native environment for running any kind of code. I have here a description of what our workflow would normally look at. You probably can't see that very much, but you can see that every department does a number of steps and then hands off to the next department. And it's the way that we've worked for a really long time in film and TV. And this is a diagram that we did of a proposed workflow. We call this the octopus. And basically everyone is working, collaborating in Unity very early on in the project, and it turns into a thing that we gradually all stand up kind of at the same time. It's after the initial hump of learning the new system, it's a much better and creative way of working, we found. I'm not going to show this entire thing, but I had mentioned that we could add, and I don't know how to do this easily. We did a test where we added a couple shots later to this. Let me see where he is. It's about up to 1 minute. Yeah. So we decided to add a shot that was a reverse angle just to see a robot eating, and this is the kind of change to this that would have taken a really long time and a ton of work if we had done it using a traditional pipeline where we have every shot broken into a different Maya scene. And this took maybe 40 minutes to do. So that's the kind of creative freedom that for a client, for a director, we think is going to be extremely attractive. So where is this? Okay. I talked about visual quality. I've got a couple of images of when we do our look dev tuning. We have we saved some of these renders, and as you can see, it's not one-to-one, but it's a visual quality that is starting to come pretty close to acceptable for most of our work. I would say there's probably a little bit of work that needs to be done on reflections, and other than that, I think everything looks really achievable. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you is that something that we did. It's also related to Sparky. Is a test that we did. The original idea for Sparky as a mascot was to have him in a live-action environment. So we have this test where we took, and this is a very early test where we took him and just put him on top of some camera footage. This is a really early one. You can see his feet are kind of sliding. So then we started playing with different angles. Let's get him closer to it. Let's turn the hat off. Let's turn the hat on. And then we did another one here. We've got some bloom going. It's starting to look a little bit better. And we did all of this. I think we ended up with 15 versions. And we did all of this in an afternoon, which is staggering if we tried to do any work like this in our old pipeline. And the amount of, I would say the final quality, because we did some tests also pre-rendering it, and if you A/B them, you do see a little bit more quality in the pre-render, but just the fact that we could iterate and polish so much, I think gives us such a better way of working and getting the quality and the look that we want. So this is a direction that we want to start looking at more, something more photorealistic, and see how much we can push Unity to do even live action film effects and photorealism. And that's it. So